Streaming 24/7.
24/7.
Bold Moves Radio.
Bold Moves Radio.
Afrika nakupenda sana. Oh, Afrika nakupenda sana.
As we promised during our launch a week ago that we'll kickstart with Ernest this week, here we are. We couldn't do it last week, Thursday, because of the sauna that we all patiently awaited for to hear what the state of the nation is, and that is now behind us, and we need to forge ahead. Now, the question is why this show? We need to find out through this show how much we love this beautiful country, South Africa. And to do that, I've got with me in the show our guest, Dr. Jeff Baloyi, and I'm co-hosting with my colleague, Moses Ngobeni. But it will be more justice to kickstart to examining how much some of those who came before us showed how much they love this country. And that can be done much better by stealing from the powerful words that were once delivered by one of our very iconic, Nelson Mandela. And that is when, at the time, he said the following: "During my lifetime, I've dedicated myself to this struggle of the African people. I fought against white domination and I fought against black domination. I've cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I'm prepared to die." How patriotic this icon did show to us that he was. And with these few words, I need to invite my co-host, Moses Ngobeni, just to say hi to our viewers on YouTube, of those that are also following us through Facebook, to all that are following us through across all social media platforms. He needs to say something to you before we can go ahead to invite our guest to introduce himself. And Moses?
Good evening to our most beautiful listeners. My name is Moses Ngobeni. I'm the co-host for your Bold Moves Love SA show with my co-host, Mr. Ntshembo. We were looking forward to being with you last week, Thursday, but that could not happen because of the sauna. You know, with issues of the state, we need to give way to each and every one of us to be at least informed and be on par with all other people, all other South Africans. In any event, we are here today and we're looking forward to a very beautiful show with you today. You may see some love on my screen. It's 2 days after Valentine's Day. They were just referring to me as Dr. Love. So I think I won't be doing justice if I don't wish all of you a happy belated Valentine's Day, and I hope you had a good one. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Ntshembo.
And what a way to introduce himself. And we'll be taking this journey with you. And it is not a journey that we need to lead. We are all leaders. We are all leading from ahead. There's no one who is a follower. So we need to take this journey together. Let me now come to why this evening is so special. It is so special because we are going to be looking at how we love this country through a very special way, and that is to look at the water aspect of our country. We know much of our time in the past, recent past rather, has been spent discussing and looking at how best as a country we can try to ensure that we preserve the water that we have. And it's one of those resources that we are not that fortunate to pride ourselves to say that we have that in abundance. We actually worldwide rated 30th. It might sound that 30th in the rankings of countries that have got a lot of water or less of it, we are doing well. But Dr. Jeff Baloyi will say more about that and will tell us how much this percentage in terms of our ranking actually means. Does it mean a lot or less? Does it tell us something in terms of how far we must try to see to it that we don't waste this much needed resource? Dr. Jeff Baloyi, you're welcome on the show. And just for the sake of our listeners, for our viewers across all social media platforms, would you introduce yourself and just say hi to them before we can carry on to let them know much of how much you have to share with them about this scarce resource, water.
Thank you. I would like first to send my greetings to the good listeners who are using the technology to listen to us through via streaming, who are the good listeners of Bold Movers Radio, and also to the two hosts, Mr. Mangani and Mr. Ngobeni. Thank you very much for having me.
That is Dr. Jeff Baloyi. And I need to say something to our viewers, to our listeners, that we need to draw inspiration from our guests. Our guests, most of the time when we speak about guests, we speak of people who are of advanced age in their living. Dr. Jeff Baloyi is a relatively young professional, but what a milestones academical that he has achieved. He's not just doctor by honor, but he is a doctor who had to work so hard to get to where he is. He's a doctor in chemical engineering, and he has special interest in water. He has special interest in renewed energy, but our focus for tonight will be on water. And I can see that Ngobeni can't wait. He has to say something, he has to throw something, and yes, let's give him a chance to say something.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Baloyi. Look, the topic of water is something that is very close to my heart, as of our listeners can see, that I'm much lighter than my co-host here. That tells you I use water not very sparingly sometimes. Yeah, that's a bit of an overuse there. But as it may, Africa is said to be one of the countries that is mostly blessed with water compared to the rest of the world, but yet the driest continent in the world. And this is after Australia, and millions of Africans still suffer from water shortages. So we are looking forward to the knowledge that Dr. Baloyi is going to bring to the show, and also to enlighten us on how important water is to the rest of the world.
And Dr. Baloyi, I understand that your interest in water has something to do, a lot to do with where you grew up. Perhaps maybe I should take this opportunity to ask you to let our listeners, to let our followers, to let our viewers know exactly where Dr. Baloyi was born. Were you born a doctor? What inspired you, given your background, to develop special interest in water?
It's a good question. Just to break the ice on the conservation, because it will inform everything as it unfolds within the conservation we're having. So the issue of water, it's something which, as a country, I might say that we have took it very much for granted. And then we also don't attach our constitutional rights in terms of access to this water. So in the results, I grew up in the communities, growing up in Hlanganan village, and then at Kuzani. You can mention all those villages, including Makasa and all this. So Njaganjak. So all those villages, when you check, we don't have water. We had experienced day zero since we were born. And one of the things which spiked my interest was that what can we really do in terms of capability development, which might be residing, so that when the decisions are made, whether in these general meetings within the
Yes, Dr. Jeff Baloyi is indicating something that is very interesting. That is the background from which he grew up. That, like many of us, he grew up within far-flung rural villages, that would experience a shortage of water, and that still continues today. We have people that go without water for days. We have people that have taps that cannot cough up water for them, and that is a very interesting thing that we need to look at, because it's not a question of whether we have infrastructure, we have taps, we have got everything that are needed to is needed to supply water, but it's a question of the water that we have. What do we do with it? How much do we go? How far do we go in terms of ensuring that we sparingly use this water? Because it's not about infrastructure, it's about the attitude with which we use this infrastructure through which we're able to access water. And he's coming with something that's very interesting. But because if I walk about dog tower, bo alwera ka zifimi village bo makasa dzitsinisa nga manda na venda hezwi khou sumbedza zwavhuḓi uri zwine vhone vho khou zwi experience musi vha tshi khou aluwa na zwino musi vha kha ḓi humela hayani ngauri vha kha ḓivha resident yange ha makasa ndi zwithu zwine na vhathu vha Venḓa vha tsinisa navho vha zwi experience. So it's not a problem that is associated with Makasa villages at which he grew up, but surrounding areas, and this happens across the breadth and width of South Africa. And Ngobeni, I see you need to indicate something, but before you can do that, Dr. Baloyi is going to indicate to us, because there's an argument, and the argument is we have so much of rains across the country. And now as we speak, this past weekend, at the beginning of this week, and it seems like it's going to be the case throughout into this forthcoming weekend, we are expected to experience a lot of rains. And the question is, why would we experience water shortage if we have rains that we go through witnessing year after year? And he has got an interesting answer to that. He just did not want to indicate more about that, saving that for you as viewers, saving for you as listeners. And I'll join you as he answers that question on the other side of the break, which we'll take shortly. And now we have just learned from Dr. Baloyi that taking up a career should not just be about how well as an individual I'm going to make it, how well as an individual I'm going to look after myself, after my family, after those that are closely connected to me, but it should be about the bigger picture. And that bigger picture informed by the love one has for the country. He took up this career that saw him and sees him now continue to pay special focus in water, because he realizes that without water, our country is doomed in many aspects. And we seem for now to be experiencing some technical glitches in carrying on with Dr. Baloyi, but he should be with us because we seem now to be back with Dr. Baloyi. Dr. Baloyi, you were carrying on. You want to carry on, or you want to
all right. No,
have the question reiterated?
Yes, I did get the question. I was waiting after the break. Yes. Okay. So it's a very good question for us to understand why all this rain leading to flooding, but the next thing the dams get full, the next thing they're empty, we don't have water. So I will be brief in response to that. We firstly you might have seen the change in terms of the rain patterns, in terms of how the rainfall eventually now that has changed over the years. So
And
if
is
you have
that
a lot of
attributable
water,
to climate change? Sorry to cut in, Dr. Baloyi. Would you say that is attributable to climate change?
of course, you see, the problem is that the more rain you receive, the more it rains, and then in a way where it's uncontrollable, it affects the infrastructure itself, which cannot cope with the volumes of the rain we receive. So that also, it's a big problem, because you will see, hence you have flooding all over. The drainage system cannot be in a proper place. And then also with the dams themselves, when water get much into the dams, you have a much dysfunctional, most of these wastewater treatment system not meeting the required standards. So they get into the dams which are already polluted, which the water cannot be used directly. But again, we need also to check how much have we invested in the infrastructure in what we call rain harvesting. So we need to come with intervention to harvest this rain, because for simple example, you don't have to go far. Just look at your house. When it's raining, how much water do you harvest for your garden or anything? So it starts there, because we need to implement the strategies in our communities which has to deal with water harvesting. So that's another problem, because the water just go and then there's no plan in terms of how do we harvest it for future use.
Somebody sitting somewhere listening to you wants to know that before we speak about all these other things, we have got infrastructure. For example, you look at, say, I know in Guyana there's Nsami Dam, and there are efforts that are in place. How far they are going, it's a question for another day, for water to be conveyed from Nandoni to Nsami Dam. But the question is, if we have rains this week, and next week, when we check the water level of Nsami Dam, we are told it's at, say, 15%. Now, the question is, what happens to the water that should be conveyed to Nsami when it rains? What happens? Somebody needs to understand what happens. Now, today, the dam is at 60%, it's raining, but next week, we're told it's at 15%. What accounts for that? What are the factors that account for such an immediate loss of water?
All right. So it's a very good question for us to understand that. What's happening is that we, as I've mentioned, we are experiencing the climate change, which you can be cited as maybe co-authors of our own misfortune, whereby you, as a country, as South Africa, we do have what we can call high evaporation rates, and then this is based on the geographical where we are placed as a country, South Africa. And then with these high evaporation rates, what happens is that it's very easy for a water to find itself evaporating very much. So the evaporation it's easy concept, which I think many of our listeners do understand. But just think of yourself in when you leave a water with a bucket open, and then you'll see that maybe that you'll see that with time the water volume get to decrease. So those some of the things we need to also think about, that we have a very high evaporation rate, and that is a problem. So meaning it also speaks to the infrastructure of the future, the engineering infrastructure of the future, in terms of how do we build dams which can be maybe in a closed system, whereby we minimize the evaporations.
Well, whilst on that, Dr. Baloyi, allow me to jump in just a little bit. But before I go on with my follow-up question, let me acknowledge a few people who are with us this evening. I see you there, Hlongwani, Hello Bold Moves members, Jolene Mangani, evening Love SA family, evening to you, Jolene. We have Lance Vuma, evening Bold Movers. We welcome you. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Baloyi, if I may, on the issue of the African continent at large, or rather South Africa, to be quite exact, having a high evaporation rate, I understand the basis behind that, informing it. But what can we do, or what is it that can be done to try and prevent? We know evaporation on its own, it's a natural occurrence that cannot be prevented. Kambe ini nga swi endlaku kusuka ku va hi informiwa hi research ku va hi preventa this high evaporation rate? Ku na ti-strategies ti nga koho leti nga implementiwaku, or swilo swo karhi leswi nga endliwaka ku va loko evaporation yi fanele yi take place hi kota ku va hi reserve that little bit yi va ku yi ri koho, yi va ku yi harvestiwini through rain harvesting?
All right. No, thank you very much, Mr. Ngobeni, for that question. The question, it goes back to us designing the infrastructure of the future. So the evaporation by itself, it happens normal in the open surface. So meaning now we need to think about when we build the reservoir. A reservoir, it's a tank where we store water. So you'll realize that in most of our villages, we in the past we used to have one each and every village, but now you find that there's one which supplies maybe a region. So that reservoir, when you look at it, it's built on the surface, and the water gets stored from the surface going up. So one of the intervention is that we need also to think about building those reservoirs underground. We limit much of their exposure to the surface, which might also assist in terms of reducing evaporation. So, and also the issue of planting trees. You know, you see people planting trees, and then at some point we think it's just a funny thing to do. It's very important in the environmental point of view, because when you plant trees, it breaks the wind. A simple concept. Hence, you see all developments, they will plant trees. And you ask yourself, sometimes you think it's all about protecting our houses against the wind, which of course it is, but there's a lot of benefits, because the trees are able to break that wind. As it breaks the wind, it decreases even the evaporation rates. So when you look at this, it's more, I like also what Mr. Manganyev said, it's also more of the psychological issues, and also looking on our indigenous science, because as we come with a very sophisticated system, the aim of science is not to make things complicated for everyone, it's for laymen to benefit from the science. That's our responsibility, as we carry that moral obligation to make sure that if I have my grandparents, they have to benefit from this knowledge, and then using their indigenous knowledge to capitalize on it so that they benefit. Let's plant trees. We put a reservoir, we put it below the surface, we plant trees around it, and then we make sure that in that area we have enough trees planted. So meaning we need to go back to the culture that we cannot have a family. In those old days, you'll find that after at the yard within the family, you will always have one tree which has been planted. So you'll always have that situation that you have maybe at least one tree planted through the streets. So those are the things, some of the interventions which we can do to assist in the situation.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Dr. Baloyi. Look, very informative and provocative in a way. Like it provokes one thought to keep on asking more, but I don't want to take much of the time going on with follow-up questions. But in any event, it would appear from your answer that the most common water harvesting strategy, as well as evaporation prevention strategy that we employ, or the most common one, is building reservoirs. How much of the high evaporation rate affects the water that has been stored in our reservoirs? And is there anything in particular? Let me think of something like covering that could prevent that high evaporation rate from affecting water that has been stored in reservoirs?
No, thank you very much, Mr. Ngoweni. Um, I think your question is around the reservoir. Yeah. Yeah, the rate itself, it's reported globally, it's sitting at around 5.4% annually. But the issue and the reality is that the rate, it also depend on where you are. So you'll need also to
Mhm,
get the real condition. Like, the way it's hot in Palabura is not the same in Pretoria, is not the same in Joburg, and that plays a
mhm,
huge role. And also the effect of the climate is not the same. You have places like Gauteng, which we always know that we always have these low temperatures. Now the temperatures have rise. In Polokwane, you get temperatures which are low. So at some point, it's no
mhm,
longer like before, and then there is no maybe one size fit all in terms of at what rate should be the evaporation increasing at that particular area, which also
mhm,
informs from the research point of view that when we need to do things, for example, at Guyana, the solution need to be tailored to Guyana. And that's what has
mhm,
failed in this country, because when you import solutions from Germany, you spend a lot of billions in white elephants, which are not working. And
yes,
that's the current mode of operandi, which is failing this state, because a lot of money will be spent for lack of better ways on a very useless project, which does not even involve the people at the ground. For a simple example, we should be embarrassed in a way that we have a crisis of water in Guyana, but we don't even have an intellect committee of people coming from the area who are working for these companies and doing projects. We have been doing projects for Mauritius. We do project now. We are running the project for whole Africa for M10. So what I'm saying is that you have expertise who some of them might not be on the spotlight, but it's for the even the government official to get these people and form some a war room, which will have to deal with a tailored solution. And then that's what will assist, because that's what the education is for, people to benefit our people. But again, many intellectuals in the water space cannot force themselves into these processes, or force themselves to squeeze themselves in the table where they are not invited. So that's to respond to the issue in terms of the rate itself. It's very much insignificant in this issue, but very important at a global scale. But we need
Okay,
to get the
Dr. Baloyi, I may have to cut in. I think your answer to that question has been loud and clear, and thank you for that. But now I need to check before we carry on into our break. I need to check something with you that about the reservoir and the issue of evaporation. Yes, reservoirs, they appear to be more of stopover of this water supply before the water is supplied to different areas. Like we have a reservoir, say, built at a particular area, but now it looks like when we speak of evaporation, it's more focused on dams and rivers. Now, the question is, what do we need to do, especially about dams, because you cannot cover dams. The way I understand this conversation, you can't cover a dam. Now, what are the measures that are there or that you are embarking upon from your career point of view to minimize evaporation from dams and rivers?
all right. So with of course, I will agree with you in terms of the dams themselves, the lakes. We talk about so many things, even the wetlands, because that also speaks to the indigenous science. We know that our parents have been sourcing water from the wetlands, yeah, the this, what do you call it, the springs. Yeah, so I will respond to that question in this way. So what we need to do is that, of course, we say we cannot cover the dam, but how do we contribute in terms of having the low evaporation rates, reducing it in terms of the dam design? And then that speaks back to say that with the current dam, we might have to come with interventions which have to be integrated, but we still have to
Mhm.
build.
I'm going to
Well,
be very
our
personal with
listeners,
you, Dr. Baloyi. Dr. Baloyi will seem once again to be experiencing a problem connecting properly with Dr. Baloyi, but he should be back with us anytime from now. And this will take us into our next commercial break, as we will want to speak to him about what exactly does it mean if we are ranked 30th globally in terms of water abundance or scarcity. This is Love SA coming through. I'm coming to you through Bold Moves Radio. I'm coursing with Moses Baloyi, and we have Dr. Jeff Baloyi as our guest, looking tonight at the water aspect of our country. And we expect Dr. Baloyi to speak to our rankings. We are ranked 30th globally in terms of the abundance of water or scarcity, and we need him to unpack that for us, to tell us exactly what does that mean and how much should this say to us in encouraging us to look after this scarce resource, water. Dr. Baloyi?
No, thank you, Mr. Mangani, for that question. Yeah, we talk about the issue in terms of water scarcity as the question which you have asked. Yeah, we are ranked, I might say, very bad in terms of water scarcity. The water scarcity as the two weights might be understood simply. It simply means that we is the ranking in terms of us not having enough water, which we need as per our population. So how is that done? If we have to get into it, the calculations in terms of the volume, which I won't go into details in terms of the rights of how many kiloliters of water, and then in terms of the constitution, I'll leave that. But what I'll look into is that we have about a value which they use in terms of 1.7 meter cubes per person per year. which it has to be allocated. And then once we reach below or reach that threshold, and then a country is regarded as a water stressed country. So so that in that instance, what it means is that we also have a high extreme scarce, water scarce countries. We like the just this country we just hosted the World Cup now, Qatar. So that's ranked first in terms of having a high extreme water scarcity. So the ranking, it has to work with the population. So what influenced the ranking is the industrial development, which makes sure that as the industries develop, and then the lot of contaminants which are reduced as the waste stream from the industry end up in our river, polluting our river, which cannot be accessible by that person we are counting in that volume. And then the other thing is that you have water, which is a lot, which we cannot use. This is, some of them is in the form of ice, some of them is in the form of seawater, even not even going to inland in terms of the polluted water. So that's what contribute to the us being ranked like this percentage being very high like this in terms of the water scarcity, that we don't have enough water in the country. We know that we get water from the Lesotho Island, most of it, and then pump into South Africa. So that's what it's considered when we have to say that this country is a water scarce country. So it's not just the water you see over the sea. That is not regarded as a resource. A polluted water is not a resource. So it's counted zero as you don't have it. Here we talk about the water which can be ready in terms of the consumption and be treated as a resource. Thanks.
Dr. Baloyi, I need to be an advocate for someone here, and I really have to execute my mandate. Dr. Baloyi, you are raising a very interesting aspect about explaining this water scarcity. Now, somebody wants to know, and he needs to get it directly. And I want to take advantage of your ability to speak one of our African languages, that is Xitsonga. I'll also try to do something about a couple of languages, because this aspect that you're addressing now is very important. Do you want to briefly recap that in Tsonga? There's somebody who needs to understand this, because the argument is people are saying we have a lot of rains, we have got this and that, but why should somebody tell us that we don't have enough water that is sufficient to look after us on a daily basis? Can you recap, Hilera Kamanana?
Okay. No, ni khense swinene mfambisi. Yeah, and I think i timhaka ta kahle ku va swin'wana hi kota ku swi vulavula hi ririmi ra manana ku hi kota ku swi kota ku fika kahle ka vanhu hinkwavo. So loko hi languta hi timhaka ta ku pfumaleka ka mati, loko hi tiko lera hina ra tiko ra hina ra South Africa, laha hi tikumaka hi khome kwalaha ka hi kuma va hi veka xiyimo xa 13 ka matiko lomo tala misaveni, hikuva khe hi kumeka hi pfumaleka mati. Se leswi va nga languta swona ngopfu, va langute ku mati lama ma nga vekiwa ku ma nga tirhisiwa hi munhu wun'we hi lembe hi siku. And then leswi swi le ka even the constitutional right leti nga kona ka hi ku ya hi vumbiwa bya tiko ra South Africa, ku munhu wun'we i na lunghelo ra ku a nga tirhisa mati yo fika hi kwini. And then mara kwa vanhu lava ku nghenelela ngopfu ka leswo mi kuma ku se i hakerisiwa, vanhu va hakela na mati lama kuma ku me le ka hi ku ya hi lunghelo ra vona va famba ma kuma mahala. And then loko va hindza laha hi ku se mi kuma ku se ku fa ku na mintsengo yin'wana leyi va famba va yi hakela. Se hina loko mi languta hi tiko lera hina ra Afrika-Dzonga, hi ku ya hi nhlayo ya vanhu lava nga kona na mati lama nga kona, lama sweswiwani hi vulavula hi mati lama nga hlantsweka, ma nga ka xiyimo xa lunghelo ku munhu a nga ma tirhisa. A hi le ku vulavuleni hi mati lama sweswiwani mi kuma i mati lama nga lwandle, i mati lama mi kuma ku ma thyakini. hi vulavula hi mati lama mi kumaka ma kota ma na lunghelo ro vanhu va nga ma tirhisa. Se hi laha mi kuma ku pfuka ku va na ku hambana ka kona ku munhu a nga fika a languta ku mara tanihi Afrika-Dzonga hi na malwandle lamakulu malwandle lama ma fike ma hlangana kwalawani, hi na mati lama hinkwawo va ku mati lamawani. So mati lama a hi mati lama nga lungheka ku hi nga ma tirhisa hi munhu a ma tirhisa. So leswi va langutaka swona ngopfungopfu loko se ku ta ka ti-ranking letiyani. Se mi kuma sweswo loko mo lava ku swi vona hi ku ya hi tiko ra hina and then na hi ku mati hi ma kuma kwihi sweswiwani. Mati sweswiwani hi ma kuma ngopfungopfu lama ma huma Lesotho Island lama taka ku ma pompiwa ma ta haleni tikweni ra hina ma kota ku hi supply hinkwaswo sweswo taniya. So sorry, so i swilo leswi mi swi vonaka ku hi ku ya hi tiko a hi na mati, ene mhaka ya mati i mhaka leyi mi kumaka sweswiwani leswi hi nga ku swi voneni swa gezi i mhaka yitsongo ngopfu. Hi ku gezi hi nga hanya hi nga ri hava, hi kule minkarhi yin'wani van'wana hi tswariwa mi kuma ku nga ri na gezi.
Dr. Baloyi va ri karhi va hi kombisa leswaku mati lawa hi nga na wona a hi hinkwawo lawa ya ringaneleke leswaku hi nga ya tirhisa. Yan'wani ya wona xikombiso xo olova i mati ya lwandle. Mati ya lwandle a hi mati lawa ya tirhisekaka and a hi mati lawa ku ya hi vuswikoti lebyi byi nga kona ku fika sweswi hi ndlela ya engineering ya nga endliwaka kumbe ku tirhiwa hi ndlela yo karhi ku va ya kota ku nweka ku fika sweswi. Sayense na hinkwaswo swi fambisanaka na sayense a swi se va na vuswikoti bya ku va swi nga hundzula mati lawa ya vonaka alwandle leswaku hi nga kota ku ri ya nweka. So ni swinambyana swin'wana swi kona swinambyana leswi a swi lo basa hi ndlela yaleyo, a ni nga swi vuli hi mavito mara ni xona Ngoveni u tshama kusuhana xin'wana xa swinambyana. A xinambyana xa mi tshama kusuhana xona Ngoveni a hi xa mati ya ku nweka, ma xi loko mi ndzhaka xona mi pfale mafesiteri ya movha ku xa nuha xo mvee. So mi nga ringeti mi nga ri na mati ku va hi ringeta ku pfuna hi mati fana ya lawa. Nga nḓila yeneyo Dr. Jeff Baloyi vha khou sumbedzisa uri Afrika Tshipembe namusi yi nga vha yi kha number 30 kha yo to sedziwa kha mashango oṱhe hafha, a zwi vhi zwi khou amba uri hu vha yi kha number 30 zwi amba uri position yashu ndi yavhuḓi musi ro no sedza mashango maṅwe uri mashango no fhira hafha ndi angani. Ri vha ri tshi khou sedza nga nḓila ine i shumiswaho nga nḓila ya tshisayense uri hu vha ho no sedziwa mini kha zwoṱhe zwine zwo vha zwo no sedziwa nṱhani Afrika Tshipembe. Afrika Tshipembe i nga vha i kha number 30 mara vhathu kha vha ḓivhe uri zwenezwo a zwi ri vhi kha position yavhuḓi uri ri nga ḓi wana ri tshi khou ḓiṱongisa uri rine position yashu i tshi khou ri vhudza uri no maḓi a rina o to linganela uri ri nga i shumisa nga nḓila dzoṱhe dzine ri nga ḓi wana dzi khou ṱoḓa uri dzi shumisa ngaho. No, kha ri tou i shumisa nga nḓila ya u vha na vhuḓifhinduleli nga maanḓa. Ni na Ngoveni ri tiva uri a ri no si hove xipedi kumbe xilovelo xi ku luthu ka lexi ya livini goxa. Ngoveni va yi vekile Dr. Baloyi.
Well, inkomo swinene kokwana Magoda. Dr. Baloyi, before hi ya ka break nyana leyi hi nga ta va na yo hi nkarhi lowu nga hetiki mbilu kumbe xivutiso lexi ni nga na xona ni nga xi hlamula loko hi ya ka break leyiwani. Mi kombise timhaka ta ku mati kumbe hi nge ma viti resource hikuva hi ma languta ku hi lama mati ya le ku khulukeni enambyeni kumbe lama nga le lwandle. But I want us to take through our listeners to what informs the process of getting just water that we see flowing from the river or water that has been stored in a reservoir. You made a point that we access most of our water here in South Africa from the Lesotho Highlands. But what informs that process to get the water from the Lesotho Highlands into the pipes flowing into different households within the territorial borders of South Africa? And also, whilst on that, the purification process that goes through to that, to what extent is that cumbersome that would make it even more difficult for people to access water? Please stay with us. I see our listeners are still with us. Joylene Mangani, very powerful. Thank you for listening, our sister. Charity Mwamvuleni, Ms. Mashele. We appreciate you too. Desmond Mongai, we are joining us. Please stay tuned. Baloyi can wrap up the conversation with us.
Okay, now, Dr. Baloyi, I am Dr. Baloyi, are you still there with us? And that is Dr. Jeff
Yes.
Baloyi. Yes. Now, ngobeni mlamza and mlamza mina ngibyela ni ke ni twa van'wana na ku fambeni man a ni tivi ku ri swi na ntiyiso ku fika kwihi loko va ri karhi va mi phata handle leswi hi nga swi tolovela va kombisa ku ri i xiphongo matlela va khongile masiya na timbyana mi ta hi byela ku ri swi na ntiyiso ku fika kwihi loko hi vuya ka xiphemu lexi landzelaka xa ku songasonga kambe Dr. Baloyi xivutiso lexi ni mi tlhandlekaka ku mi phara ka xona na swi tiva ku ri miehleketo ya n'wina yi kahle swinene mi kote ku teka swivutiso va nga mi vutisa swona ngoveni xivutiso xa mina lexi ni mi tlhandlekaka hi xona anhlaneni loko ha fanele ku vuya mavhengeleni i xa ku hi vuswikoti bya n'wina byi nga va vuswikoti lebyi byi mi tekile ku ya eka matiko man'wani ku va mi ya byi tirhisa hi ndlela leyi matiko yan'wani ya nga vona swi ri na nkoka ku va mi ya pfuna ku va ya kota ku va ya hlayisa mati a hi swi twini sweswo loko hi biya emavhengeleni.
It would appear technology is getting the better side of us. And in that event, if it's getting the better side of us, these things are robotics. People like my co-host here, Kokwan Magoda, BBT, Born Before Technology, we would understand that. Let's pardon that. In any event, we are not left with much time. So I would invite Dr. Baloyi at this point in time to actually proceed and answer the questions that have been put forth. Dr. Baloyi, should we rephrase, should we put forth the questions again, or you have them?
So I think unless if maybe you can wait me to in terms of respond, and then if tin'wana nga ni sini ku nga hlamulangi, and then mi nga ndla a follow up ka yona. So ni ta hlamula yo sungula hi ndlela leyi mi te na xivutiso xa kahle ku i ncini lexi endlaku hi ku mati lamawani a ma le ka ringanelo wa kahle ku ma nga kota ku ma nwa hi vanhu. So meaning yeah, so what we look into is that xo sungula hina as a vanhu hi hina xivangelo xikulu. We are the cause for water pollution more than many other things. Before the nature and everything, because the water which we get, it can be underground, like the water will be clean. Of course, we have some traces of elements which might be occurring naturally, whether there's a dolomite rock and all that. Mara hina xivangelo xikulu. Mati ma thyakisiwa ngopfu hi ti-chemicals leti nghenaka ematini lama nga tenga. Ma thyakisiwa ngopfu hi even all activities leti endlaka economy, whether agriculture and everything. Loko mi ta lava fika the fertilizers we use and all those things, they pollute our water. So hence I said what the main reason. Let's look at the sanitation process itself. When we deal with the sanitation process, you flush from your home, it goes through the distribution network, it goes back to the water treatment plant and come back. However, the things we eat, the nutrients we eat, it get into water through flushing, and then that pollute our water. So meaning each one of us have a moral obligation to play a role in this topic of water, because we are the reason. The only difference is that who's polluting more than anyone, which we find the culprits being the industries which are polluting, including the unfortunate situation of acid mine drainage, which were carrying a burden of those who might have enriched themselves. Some even left the country, but the decant now was still suffering from that previous activities. So we as a human beings are the main cause of pollution. The change in our action, the move in terms of the sustainable processes, the move in terms of addressing the issues and then trying to deal with the issues which can assist us to navigate through the climate change will really assist us to get a better water in terms of the water quality. So there was, I think there was another last question, which was asking in terms of exactly where my involvement with the team, where we might have assisted. We have assisted various countries, went to as far as even Poland, and then we assisted even the Iceland, Mauritius. So there's a lot of number of countries which we have assisted. And then also, as I speak, we are working with the municipalities, which we are assisting them.
Dr. Baloyi is saying now, what he's actually saying is that as a country, as Mzansi, as South Africa, as Africa Chipemba, as Africa Burwa, we do have the expertise that is recognized, that has been recognized by other countries in their efforts to preserve water. Now the question is, I would like those Asian nations who failed to recognize their own prophets. Because with the likes of Dr. Baloyi, we should be, as a country, be able to not only talk about the challenges that arises from water scarcity, but take meaningful measures towards alleviating the situation that has actually reached crisis level. If Dr. Baloyi were to indicate our water crisis is worse than the electricity crisis, and now if we can complain, and justifiably so as a society, as a country, about how much of an inconvenience, how much of a loss that is brought about by load shedding. Now the question is, how much of what we are now overlooking is negatively impacting on our society? We may not see it today, or we may choose to close our eyes to the impact of water crisis. And such an overlooking will amount to nothing but short-sightedness by current generation, will amount to nothing but selfishness, because that would go to impact negatively to a large extent on future generations. Are we now as society, are we now as South Africans living today in this beautiful country prepared to be remembered as the generation that decided to go the selfish way? And my answer, if I were to speak for myself and my family, my answer will be a big no. I would want to be remembered as one of those who fought to preserve this scarce resource.
Perhaps to add on that, on the seriousness of the scarcity of water, I think what Dr. Baloyi has already shared with us at this point in time cannot be overemphasized, if I can put it that way. We need to take it, we need to step up to the responsibility as citizens to make sure we preserve water in the best possible way that there is. We need to look at provinces within our country that have experienced a day zero. When Dr. Baloyi makes a point of reference to say the scarcity of water is far much more worse and serious than the presenting problem of load shedding that we are facing as a country. I am reminded of this, that with load shedding, we have alternatives, independent power producers, we have solar energy, we have generators that can give us alternative power. But nothing can stand as an alternative to water, because each and every alternative to water, its primary ingredient is water. So that should on its own tell us of how bigger of a problem we are facing. We cannot be a country that has higher concentration of water around us, and yes, we still live in one of the most driest places with the highest percentage when it comes to the scarcity of water.
Yes, and if Dr. Baloyi were to indicate to us, he would say more, but unfortunately time is not on our side. He will say a lot about how much of an impact the water scarcity has on mining. And mining remains one, and agriculture. And these two classes of our economy remain the biggest and critical engines for who as South Africans we are, and who as South Africa we are to be. There's a lot that is happening negatively as a result of water scarcity on those two classes of our economy. And this brings us to a close. This brings us to an end of our today's edition. Remember, we are a patriotic movement, is a patriotic journey that seeks to get stories that encourages all across South Africa about how good we are and how well we can do as a country, how together we can form a winning team, that which we all need more than any other thing. And thank you, Ngobeni, and thank you to our producer. Thank you very, very much to our listeners. Thank you for the vote of confidence that you continue to show to us by tuning in, by staying in touch with us, sharing with us. This is a collective responsibility, and we need you to tell us more about others that can tell us stories that can encourage us, that can shape us as a country. From us, we say a beautiful evening.
To my co-host Kokwan Magoda, hi ta va endla xihoxo xikulukumba swinene loko hi nga nyiki Dr. Baloyi nkarhi wa ku va na ti-closing comments. Ku vulavula a ku heli, ku hela nkarhi lowu a hi ri na a wu ri tsanana, mara ni pfumela ku ya mahlweni we're still gonna have more time with Dr. Baloyi, where he's going to be dishing out more knowledge about this to us. But if I can just get these few seconds that are left, Dr. Baloyi, your closing comments.
Abanyamalari, okay, inko.
Well, on that silent note, to our loyal and beautiful listeners, technology has got the better side of us again. From me, your co-host tonight on this very informative show, thank you for joining us. Jolene Mangani, thank you for joining us. Charity Mwamvuleni, I see you there. Nix Macha, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. We thank you so much for joining us in this show, and we look forward to having you again next week, Thursday, when we continue on another discussion. Good evening.
24/7. 24/7.
Bold Moves Radio.
Bold Moves Radio.
Afrika, nakupenda sana. Oh, Afrika, nakupenda sana.